Hi, kids. We're having a beautiful spring morning here on the Oregon coast, and I'm excited to read the third and final excerpt from Elvia and the Gift of Passion, Chapter 1. In the first two installments, you learned that Elvia doesn't believe that her parents, Earl and Sally Hill, are her biological parents, and she gets support for that when she gets the results of a DNA test that shows she's not German, as her parents always claimed, but 99.1% Zulu with a pinch of Irish thrown in. She longs to go to Africa to meet her real parents, and her wish comes true when her mother fortuitously wins a raffle at work, and they prepare to fly to Tanzania for a wildlife safari. Earl and Sally, who are ridiculously overprotective, are tense with worry. They fear that something dreadful will happen to Elvia on the trip with all those wild animals. But Elvia has her eyes setting on meeting Zenzele Bembe and his wife, two Zulu lion researchers in Tembo National Park, who she's decided, without much evidence, by the way, are her real biological parents. She's determined to use the trip as an opportunity to reunite with them. Meanwhile, her parents, Earl and Sally, are completely clueless that that's what she plans to do. Let's see what happens next as Elvia and her family embark on their big adventure. Over the ensuing weeks, Earl and Sally finalized the plans. They arranged for a neighbor to cat-sit Nilo. They added Elvia to their flight itinerary. They emailed Safari Adventures, alerting the company to expect 3 hills instead of 2. And they paid the rush fee to make sure Elvia's passport arrived on time. It was a whirlwind of activity. Christmas came and went in a blur, but the day for their departure finally came. On a chilly January morning, 2 hours before dawn, they dragged 3 neatly packed suitcases and 2 tidy carry-on bags to the curb where an airport shuttle awaited them. Elvia was so hyped up that she could hardly sit still. The long journey involved 2 flights. The first was on Dutch Airways from Portland, Oregon to Amsterdam in the Netherlands. The second arced south over the equator to Arusha, a tourist town nestled at the base of Mount Kilimanjaro. It would be a trial for Earl and Sally. They were tense with worry, but excited Elvia couldn't wait for the venture to begin. Dutch Airways was famous for its fleet of modern luxury airplanes, and Elvia soon settled in, happily contemplating the wonders that awaited her in Tanzania. She had a loose tooth, and Sally promised her that if she lost it in Africa, the tooth fairy would pay for it in Tanzanian shillings. Elvia no longer believed in the tooth fairy. She was 10 now, and such childish notions were long extinct, but she played along. She'd never had any foreign currency that was her own. Each passenger had their own video screen, and Elvia focused on hers, scrolling through her entertainment options. Soon she settled on Simbisi, Lost King of the Savannah, an animated movie about a young lion raised by parents who didn't understand him. He sensed he was different, and it turned out he was right. He'd been separated from his real parents, who were king and queen of the expansive savannah that lay between inland Lake Victoria and Mombasa on the Kenyan coast. The story of Simbisi's journey to reunite with them and find out who he really was exciting, with many twists and turns. Elvia loved the story. Simbisi had found his way home, and so would she. Soon, if all went according to plan, the lions in Tembo National Park would be her siblings of a sort. In his book, Dr. Membry called them his children. The fanciful idea lit her up inside. She couldn't remember Jane, who died before she was born, and she'd always hated being an only child. When the movie was over, Elvia became restless and wanted to tour the plane. The fastened seatbelt's light was off, and Earl agreed to walk her up and down the aisle. Overjoyed to be cruising 30,000 feet above the ocean, closer to the Bembas at every bump of turbulence, she grinned as she passed the other passengers. Earl, meantime, was relieved at how well the trip was progressing. Maybe he'd been mistaken. Maybe everything would go according to plan. He smiled as he told himself with relief, Elvia will be all right. He was wrong. As they neared the back of the plane, a middle-aged African man seated on the aisle motioned for Elvia to stop. He was wearing traditional clothing, a yellow robe, and a striped cap. Reaching out to touch her long red hair, he asked in a thick accent, May I? It's so beautiful. Elvia nodded, pleased by the man's attention, but Earl stiffened. Protective, fatherly sixth sense kicking in. The passenger was too eager, almost hungry, as his hand found its mark. The glint in his eye was evil. The hairs on Earl's neck stood on end, and he instinctively pushed Elvia ahead of him toward the tiny restrooms at the far back, where they turned round and headed up the opposite aisle. When they arrived back at their seats, Earl leaned over and quietly told Sally about the unnerving incident. They were only 6 hours into the trip, and there was already trouble. Do you think he's dangerous? Sally asked worriedly, also keeping her voice low. I don't know, but keep an eye on Elvia when we get to Amsterdam. I don't want that man getting anywhere near her. When the mighty plane touched down and they disembarked into the terminal, Sally protectively steered Elvia into the nearest gift shop. Meanwhile, Earl scanned the visual display announcing arrivals and departures, looking for their Air Twiga flight. Tanzania? Asked a deep voice behind him. Earl turned round and found himself face to face with a man in the yellow robe. They were about the same height, 6 feet, give or take an inch. Yes, Earl replied warily. Why do you ask? The man eased forward and slipped a business card into Earl's hand, giving him a smile and a wink, as if they were co-conspirators in a crime. I'll give you the best price, guaranteed, he whispered, as if someone might be listening in. Earl examined the crudely made card. The man's name was Jelani Kabiki, and he ran a company called True Believers in Arusha. Price for what? Earl asked, his frown deepening. I'm not selling anything. Jelani blinked, and Earl suddenly realized that the man was sweating. Beads of salty perspiration glistened on his brow, reflecting the harsh airport lights. You're not? Jelani asked, his eyes growing wide. Repulsed, Earl backed away and replied, No, you've made a mistake. Jelani retreated too, no longer buddy-buddy. I'm sorry, sir, he said briskly. I thought you were a businessman. No, I'm a tourist. I'm taking my family on safari, Earl replied, glad to be setting the record straight. He didn't want the man bothering them again. In that case, Jelani warned, wagging a finger at Earl as he walked away. Watch over that daughter of yours. She won't be safe in my country.
Shh.